America is all about having freedom. People from other countries travel to America for this aspect. Coming from a family of immigrants, both sides of my family have come from their mother country. Both families come to America looking for the freedom that America is most well known for. When you think of freedom, you're most likely to think the First Amendment. The First Amendment is always summarized as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, and the right to assemble, and the right to petition government. According to fine law, it states that the First Amendment is Congress shall not make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right to the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. It can be a controversial topic, but it should be spoken about because it is part of our way of life as American citizens. This amendment is essential to our government today, especially with how much diversity is brought into our country. Do you actually know where the amendments came from? The amendments came from James Madison. ThoughtCo states that James Madison was known to be the father of the Constitution. The author of the article, Tom Head, explains why the First Amendment was created in the first place, explains that Madison wanted separation of the church and state. He believed that no one should come between a man and his God, and that he had the right, and the men had the right to choose their own fate. He also adds that Madison attended Princeton and studied Greeks, and those Greeks had Plato and Socrates, who valued freedom during their time period. He also explains that Madison valued the idea of importance of uncensored circulation of ideas. In addition to that, it took away the censorship that occurred during the British rule. He carries on to explain that this was also part of the reason for freedom of assembly to come into play, and he ends with the right to petition is a part of the First Amendment. And he says that this was already established by the Magna Carta in 1215 and was also reiterated in the Declaration of Independence when colonists accused the British monarch of not having listened to their grievances. History.com also gives a background of this, and the Bill of Rights and explains that the Bill of Rights was introduced to Congress in 1789, adopted in December 15th, 19th, or 1791, and includes the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution. Madison created all these basic freedom, or created the First Amendment to protect basic freedoms of a citizen in the United States. Galileo in 1633 was brought before the Inquisition for insisting that the sun does not revolve around the earth. His punishment for that was house arrest and a crime that would have been protected by free speech in a century later. History.com again states that that the church had this idea that the sun moved around the earth was an absolute fact of the scripture that could not be disputed, despite the fact that scientists had known for centuries that the earth was not the center of the universe. Galileo was wrongfully convicted of heresy, and the church forced him to confess something where he didn't do wrong, and the First Amendment would have benefited him in this situation. The First Amendment was to protect citizens of their God-given rights, and it would have helped out Galileo. So flag burning could be an example of First Amendment, where First Amendment to be shown, and the First Amendment was shown in Texas v. Johnson. Do you know any other court cases or any other court case regarding the First Amendment? Well, Texas v. Johnson is one of the cases that I learned in my U.S. history class. If I remember correctly, Texas v. Johnson was primarily focused on the question if the flag burning was an action that was protected by the First Amendment. So OIA's, a website containing archives of a variety of court cases, states in 1984 in front of the Dallas City Hall, Gregory Gregory Lee Johnson burned an American flag as means to the protest against Reagan administration policies. And so Johnson tried and convicted under Texas law outlawing flag discussion, and he was sentenced to 1 year in jail and with a $2,000 fine. Texas Court of Criminals reversed the conviction, and the case went to the Supreme Court. This is just the background and the facts of the case, but the website goes on to rule out that it was a 5-4 decision, and just because society may describe it as disagreeable, it was actually protected by the First Amendment. Another court case would have been Cohen v. California, and this is another court case where a 19-year-old male, Paul Cohen, wore a jacket saying, "Fuck the draft, stop the war." He wore the jacket in his objection to the war. Oyes again summarizes this court case and later explains that the First Amendment did overall protect Cohen's rights to freedom of expression, and the ruling ended to a 5-4 decision, just like Texas v. Johnson. Freedom of religion, one of the basic freedoms through the First Amendment. In America, you are allowed to practice your own religion without regulations. In this case, this wasn't the case in Hialeah, Florida. So in Hialeah, Florida, there was a church called the Lukemi Babalu A, who practiced the Afro-Caribbean-based religion Santeria, and they used animal sacrifices. And the ruling decided that the city of Hialeah was violating the First Amendment right and freedom of religion. And so it was a unanimous decision due to the right of freedom of religion within the First Amendment. Although it was gruesome, it did not mean negative consciousness towards the animal. It was just a part of the religion. Court cases like this are a good example of the First Amendment. Another example to think about is in our school system. The First Amendment is shown through our school system, but not as you think. How do you think the First Amendment is displayed in our court system today, or in our school system today? A court case to think about is Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District. And this is just another court case discussing the topic of freedom of speech. Oyes, once again, talks about how 2 young students decided to wear armbands to portray their support for a truce during the Vietnam War. The website describes to go on how the principals went up along this case, and Mary Beth Tinker and Christopher Earhart both wore armbands without care and got sent home for it. And then John Tinker did the same, and they all didn't return to school after New Year's Day. And they felt that their freedom of speech was being removed, and the court ruled 7-2 for Tinker, and it was a win for the children, and the justices had something to say. That they weren't necessarily guaranteed the full extent of our First Amendment rights during this case. Another thing was that West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett was made by the U.S. Supreme Court that displays the First Amendment rights for protecting students from being forced to salute during the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. So Jehovah's Witnesses, according to Oyes again, refused to perform the salute and were sent home for school for non-compliance. But Jehovah's Witnesses morals say it was a sin to salute or pledge symbols, especially those with political institutions. And this was a 6-3 decision. Another one is School District of Abington Township versus Pennsylvania School. And Oyes does talk about this again and talks about how Pennsylvania forced the students in schools to read the Bible, a part of their curriculum. It was ruled to be an 8-1 decision, and found that making children read the Bible mandatory to be unconstitutional. In school systems, the First Amendment is strongly issued. Although school systems aren't the only place the First Amendment was brought to attention of the U.S., it's everywhere. The First Amendment was brought to the U.S. to protect the citizens of it, and is still shown throughout the history of it. All in all, I do believe that these court cases have taught me some things, and I truly do understand what freedom is and why it's essential to our government. Most people have the idea that the government is getting to do whatever you want, whenever you want. The idea of freedom is getting to say whatever you want, whenever you want. It is not actually what it is. I've always thought it was simple, and these court cases have showed me there are many other things that can be protected by your rights. I truly believe that these cases were used appropriately, and I feel that our government is issuing or using these rights essentially. Do you?